Hi sewing friends, I'm Amy, and usually I'm the voice behind the camera, but today I'm very excited to be here in front of the camera introducing you to our Quilt Block of the Month series featuring the Sweet Dreams quilt, which is a free project available on Creativate. I will link that down in the description box below so you can follow along with me as we play around with this fun quilt project. So the Sweet Dreams quilt is actually a sampler quilt. It has a lot of quilt blocks that are very traditional quilt blocks. We are going to take those quilt blocks and give them a little bit of zhuzhing in order to make them uniquely you. And to do that, we're going to be using a lot of the special techniques and features and stitches and feet that are available for our wonderful Pfaff machines. I have the Quilt Expression 725 behind me, and that is the machine that I'm going to be using for the very first quilt block project, which is the rail fence block. So this quilt actually has 3 rail fences in it. One that is just a single rail fence but large, one that is 3 across, and one that is 4 square rail fence. And for each of those blocks, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So let's get started with this, but before we do, I want to say, as I was recording a lot of this, I had some sound going in and out. So sometimes you will hear me talking right behind the camera. Sometimes it will be a voiceover. So apologies for that. Hopefully I will get my microphone figured out for the next one. All right, so let's get sewing. The first of our 3 rail fences that we're going to be working on is the long rail fences block. So on this one, this is the one that I am using stacking stitches on the middle one. So I've already done the purple one, and I have already done the green aqua one. So I am going to take you over to the sewing machine right now, and we are going to work on the blue one. And for this, I am using some variegated thread, green and like a pink orange combination. Okay, to the sewing machine. I forgot to draw a line down the center of my fabric. So 3 1/4 means I need 1 5/8 is halfway. This would have been easier on the table. Good enough. A starting spot. All right. We are going to start with the needle down at the beginning here. And I'm going to put a little clip in here showing the stitch that I am choosing. And then I'm going to hit play. Okay, so now I have changed to my pink, and I'm going to line this up so my needle drops right in that same spot. And then we hit play. I am actually using the wrong presser foot here. I should be using the number 8 foot, but I was using the 2A fancy stitch. It still worked, but I want to acknowledge that it's not the suggested foot. Perfect. This is an air erasing marker that I've used, so that will come out by tomorrow. You want to carefully peel off that tearaway paper, and I like to keep my finger on the stitches and then carefully peel back this side. And I'm going to save that, and then also carefully peel back this side. And I will readily admit that I am a picker, so off camera I will no doubt go in and pick all of the rest of this out. I am now going to switch out from the 2A foot over to my 1/4 inch right guide foot, because I am going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance when putting these together, but I'm going to switch out to white thread first. All right, and I'm putting this one in the center of the fence block. So we'll get that nice and lined up. Start here, find my foot pedal. Oops, sewing on camera. Sometimes I go a little crookedy. Right. And I'll get the light one. That lined up as best I can, up through a camera lens. I'm not much of a pinner unless I really need to match seams. So these long strips, I'm just matching up the edges and sewing my seam. All right. Clip that. All right. So I'm going to take this and press it and get it squared up, so I can piece it together with the other two pieces. And as always, I press as stitched first and then press to one side. I'm pressing my seams away from the center on these blocks, but the direction that you press is totally up to you. I am certainly not going to judge. For the rail fence, we're not going to stitch them side by side, but turn them in opposite directions. You can, of course, choose which one you want to be vertical and which are horizontal. Totally your preference. And I am going to backstitch here, only because this is not going to get put together anytime soon. So I want to make sure nothing unravels. Okay, and this one will go this way. For this rail fence design, the instructions actually suggest using a floating stitch, and that is what I am doing. So I have already put a couple together, and I am only piecing the blocks with floating stitches. I'm sewing them together with a normal seam. Here is what I did, and I have one more block to go that I am going to do with you on the machine. I'm going to use this square floating stitch, but I want to change the density a little bit just to make it a little bit tighter as I stitch. Just looks a little bit nicer. When creating the floating stitches, you will want to use the same thread in the top and bobbin. I am using 40 weight rayon embroidery thread for all of mine. I usually take my stabilizer off before I open up the seam because I think it's easier to take the stabilizer off. I can pick the rest of that out later. But here is, let me move out a little bit. Here is the beauty of the floating stitch. Oh, always satisfies. Oh, love it. Love it. All right, let's get the next one. And yes, I am using the 1A foot with the IDT, and I'm using the edge of the presser foot as the seam allowance on this particular block. I am using that wider seam allowance only because it just means I don't have to do quite as much truing up of this particular block. You can arrange these 4x4 blocks, again, any which way that you would like, especially if you're doing different colors. Just take a look, play around with it, and see what you think looks best. I am just using a regular stitch to stitch these together since I used, I'll probably want to go ahead and put that back on the straight stitch since I used so many different colors. When putting this together, I didn't want to have to decide what color I was going to use between each block. I don't know why I just did that instead of just chain piecing it like a regular person would. This one and this one, I'm going to go press. And here is this finished block. Oh, loving all these different colors on the floating stitches. This last rail fence is just one big giant 12.5-inch square. For this one, I'm still keeping with my color theme. But for my center block, I have gone into my purple scrap bin and just pulled out a bunch of random purples, and I am going to do a little bit of scrappy crazy quilting on this centerpiece, and then I'm going to put it together. Changed my mind. I had originally planned to only add the scrappy piecing in the center of this strip, but I didn't end up liking the look of that, so I changed my mind. And as I trim all this down, don't worry, all those ends will go back in the scrap bin that never seems to get any smaller. I'm not the only person who has that issue, am I? Let's go put some crazy stitches on this. Why not? And while you weren't looking, I went and did a bunch of decorative stitches all over this, so I can now go ahead and put these together. And there is the final block. Okay, now that we are finished, I hope everyone is feeling very inspired to go out and play a little bit more and think about ways that you can make your quilt blocks a little bit more exciting and fun. And so I do want to show you my final blocks for these 3 blocks. Let me pull these out here. So here's the first one that I did, which is the 3 across with the stacking stitches on them. So I'm pretty pleased with how that one turned out. And then I've got the 2x2 with the floating stitches and all the different colors, and I'm completely in love with this block. And then of course the last one that I did is the one that I did the crazy patch with the crazy stitches. And I'm really pleased with this one that I used just the aqua stitching to kind of pull those in together to make it work a little bit better, I hope. So everyone have fun, happy stitching, and I'll see you next month.